Ancient Persia. Fearless, formidable, unrelenting. For ages, shrouded in mystery. An empire unparalleled in conquest and riches.
To create an empire of the size of the Persian Empire, the largest empire the world had known, obviously takes military skill.
From North Africa to Asia, it was a civilization driven by a dynasty of extraordinary rulers, ambitious and all-powerful.
Cyrus the Great is one of the few who deserves to be called the Great.
The Persian Empire created some of the most astonishing feats of engineering the world has ever seen. Magnificent palaces that rose up from barren desert. Roadways, bridges, and canals.
Everyone has heard of the Suez Canal, but how many have heard of Darius's Canal?
But dark clouds were on the horizon. An ancient rivalry with Greece would erupt into an epic clash that changed the course of history and shaped the Western world for thousands of years to come. (330 BC). A young Macedonian king conquers the Persian Empire and leads his invading army into Persepolis, its spectacular capital city. The Macedonian ruler is Alexander the Great, an admirer of the great Persian kings. By sundown, the Greek victory celebration degenerates into a drunken melee. By sunup, Persepolis, the crown jewel of the Persian Empire, with palaces unrivaled anywhere in the world, is burned to the ground. More than 2,500 years later, these immense towers stand as testament to the soaring heights this now forgotten empire once reached.
I equate Persia with luxury, with rich tapestries and beautiful rugs and my mother's fat, fuzzy Persian cat named Otis. But I also think of a fantastic Persian king named Cyrus the Great, who believed in religious and cultural tolerance, and who freed the Jews from Babylon to return to Israel. Hello, I'm Peter Weller, and welcome to the Persian Empire. Around 4000 BC, two nomadic tribes were starting to take root in a rich but hot Iranian plateau, the Medes in the north, the Persians in the south. Being as that these tribes were nomadic, they were more interested in survival than conquest. As they became less nomadic, they had to learn how to farm, in particular how to cultivate this fertile Iranian plateau. But to do that, they needed a source of water. The early Persians may have very well become dust in the winds of history had they not unlocked a source of water and, just as importantly, a means to channel that water to their crops and settlements. And what makes this engineering feat so remarkable is that they found this water not from rivers or lakes or oceans, but from the most unlikely source of all, rocks.
Persia emerged out of nothing, a rugged, hostile terrain built with only invention and determination. 3,000 years ago, nomadic early Persians roamed the parched, forbidding Iranian plateau. Finding water meant traveling long distances. It fell to a hybrid engineer, geologist and diviner called a Mogani to figure out how to bring it back to his people. Using nothing more than stone chisels, Moganis would build the first cornerstone of the Persian Empire. A breakthrough system of underground irrigation canals called qanats. They began by harnessing gravity to exploit the natural topography of their land, which sloped relentlessly down from the Alborz Mountains towards the Persian Gulf. Vertical shafts were first dug down from the surface, and the tunnel was excavated horizontally for a short distance. Then another vertical shaft was built, approximately 3/4 of a mile up the slope, and the channel continued. The angle of the slope was crucial. 1 unit in elevation for every 100 on the horizontal.
Not too steep, because that would erode the base of the water channel, and of course not so flat as to prevent the water from moving to its intended destination.
2,000 years before Rome's legendary aqueducts, the Persians were channeling massive amounts of water over long distances. In hot, dry climates, with minimal loss due to leakage or evaporation.
Water means food, but the engineering technology to locate that water and move it was a carrot that the Persians were dangling in front of their neighbors. Around 700 BC, all of these tribes were united under one legendary figure named Achaemenes, who founded a dynasty. But this dynasty thrived and flourished under one guy, a guy I would have liked to have met, named Cyrus the Great. Cyrus created and maintained an empire thanks, no doubt, to his military savvy, but he was also a political genius. He was an excellent, benevolent manager of men. Historians have called him humanist. The Jews call him Mashiach, or Anointed One. His own people called him Father, and even the Ionian Greeks, whom he conquered, called him a just and worthy lawgiver and ruler.
Cyrus the Great came to power in 559 BC. It was the beginning of the Achaemenid dynasty. Their reign would change the course of history and redefine architectural possibility.
If you're looking at the greatest personages in history who have affected the world, Cyrus the Great is one of the few who deserves that epithet, the one who deserves to be called the Great. The empire over which Cyrus ruled was the largest the ancient world had ever seen, and may be to this day the largest empire ever.
By 554 BC, Cyrus had crushed all rivals and became the undisputed leader of Persia. Now it was time to conquer the world. And if he was going to build an empire, he would need a magnificent capital city to reflect its growing stature. In 550 BC, Cyrus launched one of the most ambitious engineering projects anywhere in the ancient world. The Persian Empire's first great capital city at Pasargad, located in modern Iran.
Cyrus was a very innovative builder, and I might add that his standards were particularly high. We can also say that his building project reflected in some ways the technologies that he found in the course of his various conquests.
Like the Romans centuries later, the Persians were borrowers. They took the best and most advanced ideas from the cultures they conquered, then developed them even further into technologies uniquely their own. The art and engineering of Pasargad drew on influences as far-flung as Assyria, Egypt, and Asia Minor, thousands of miles away.
There were stone workers, woodworkers, brick makers, relief makers, and we know that these were people often imported from all over the empire.
Today, over 2,500 years later, crumbling ruins are the only remnants of what was once here, Persia's first shining capital city. As Pasargad was being built, Cyrus added to his dominion one enemy kingdom after another. But Cyrus was a very different kind of king. He refused to enslave his new subjects, a revolutionary concept in the ancient world.
He recognized the local validity, if you will, of different religions and beliefs, and allowed those things to persist.
In 539, Cyrus conquered Babylon, but he did not present himself as a conqueror. He presented himself as a liberator, rescuing these people from their despotic ruler. And then he did a totally unprecedented thing. He freed the Jews. The Jews had been living in Babylon in captivity ever since Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and their temple, and Cyrus freed them. Now, it could be said in hindsight or political history that Cyrus was looking for a buffer state between a hostile Egypt and his own empire. But so what? The point is that no one had ever done anything like this, and hardly anyone has ever done anything like it since. And subsequently, he is the only Gentile in the Bible to be referred to as Mashiach, or Messiah.
As one distinguished Oxford scholar once said to me, Cyrus always had a very good press. It's a very true statement.
Before he could launch the campaign that would make Persia the lone superpower of the ancient world, Cyrus the Great died in battle in 530 BC.
He didn't live long enough to show what really he could have done outside the battlefield. So in that sense, you can compare him with Julius Caesar, who conquered, but did not live long enough, he was assassinated, to put the empire that he conquered together.
By the time Cyrus died, the Persian Empire had 3 capitals: Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana. But he chose to be buried in the city he created, Pasargad, in a tomb that mirrored the man who built it.
At Cyrus's tomb, one of the aspects that shows his humility is that tomb is relatively unadorned, very simple, very elegant.
The tomb of Cyrus is a very simple, outwardly modest monument for somebody who had created the largest empire that the world had seen to that date, and it's still remarkably well preserved after 25 centuries.
For 30 years, no power on earth could stand up to Cyrus the Great. Now his throne was up for grabs, creating a power vacuum that would throw the ancient world into chaos. The word paradisia in Old Persian became paradise in ancient Greek. "530 BC, Cyrus the Great, the architect of the greatest empire the world had ever known, is dead. For Persia, its future now hung in the balance. Rivals and pretenders to the throne vied for power. Then a distant cousin of Cyrus, a brilliant general, rose up to assume power. When the smoke cleared, the Persian Empire was securely in his grasp. His name was Darius. And he would become arguably the greatest Persian king and one of the greatest builders of all time. Darius hit the ground running. He began by rebuilding the old capital of Susa with grand new palaces adorned in glazed brick. Today, the magnificence of the capital Susa is even found in the Bible.
When the Greeks talk about Persian palaces, for example, they routinely mention Susa. When the Old Testament book of Esther talks about Persian palaces, it's Susa that they mention.
But the new king of Persia wanted a ceremonial capital all his own. 518 BC, Darius launched one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world. Located near the modern city of Shiraz, it would become known as Persepolis, or Persian city in Greek. All of the palaces rose from a vast stone platform designed to enhance the stature of the empire.
The terrace square is huge, over 125,000 square meters. And he had to modify the landscape. His engineers had to come in and level out part of the area, and they had to build a retaining wall. He wanted it to be seen from a distance. That's exactly why you build up a terrace, so it could be viewed from afar. That makes it all the more grand and imposing.
Persepolis was a colossal engineering challenge, with walls more than 60 feet high and 35 feet thick, and great halls featuring intricately designed columns. Thousands of architects, craftsmen, and laborers, along with tons of materials, were brought from the far reaches of the empire. Most ancient empires were built by massive armies of slave labor, but Darius, like Cyrus, believed in paying for the work that built Persia's palaces and monuments.
Every worker was given his due, his or her due, because we also find women in the workforce as well. Depending on their skill, what the quality they brought to the work, they were paid accordingly.
No expense was spared. Persepolis would be the signature monument of Persian power and glory.
First of all, it's important to remember the origin of the Persians themselves. That is to say that these were a nomadic people. They lived in tented accommodation, and they would up their tents, move somewhere else, and plant their tents again. Now, as time went on, these tents became more and more elaborate affairs. And essentially what we're having at Persepolis is a tent turned into stone. The Apadana is nothing more than a stone tented building.
The magnificent audience hall Darius built was called the Apadana.
Each of those great monumental stone pillars are inspired by the kinds of wooden pillars that upheld a beautiful canvas roof. But now that canvas roof has turned to beautiful cedar wood instead. So the nomadic origins of the Persians gives the impetus to part of their architecture, but that's not all.
The city's palaces were adorned in gold and silver, expensive tapestries and colorful tiles. The walls were studded with carved reliefs of peaceful depictions of visiting dignitaries from conquered lands. But Persepolis' spectacular engineering achievements extended far beyond the city walls. Its intricately designed and constructed water and drainage system were unrivaled anywhere.
Before the actual soil was placed in, first, Darius's engineers constructed a drainage system, plumbing, drain pipes. These would be covered. Water was also brought in along the Qanat system. But then those drain pipes, which would drain the effluents out, those were taken underground below the surface where the visitor would never see that.
Even during his most ambitious projects to enhance the empire's monuments and infrastructure, Darius never stopped expanding his empire.
Under the brilliant leadership of Darius, the Persian Empire grew to staggering size. It included modern Iran and Pakistan, parts of Afghanistan, Armenia, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, parts of Central Asia, all the way to northern India. And man, this is a lot of turf.
To connect the farthest reaches of the empire, Darius would launch two audacious building projects. One would stretch over 1,500 miles of the Persian Empire. The other would connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. Creating gardens was held in such high esteem that the Persian kings wished to be remembered as gardeners. Under the rule of Darius the Great, the Persian Empire grew to staggering proportions. Now he wanted to consolidate and connect the far-flung parts of his great kingdom. 515 BC, Darius orders his engineers to build a massive stone highway, one that would weave the empire together from North Africa to India. Extending over 1,500 miles of the empire, he would call it the Royal Road.
This was quite the engineering feat because this had to traverse through mountains, forests, deserts. So typically, earth would be packed, hardened, for example. They may not have had asphalt, but they certainly had knowledge of packing gravel or tiny rocks.
Laying down a stone road is vital in a terrain where there could be a high water table. You don't want to get your feet stuck in the mud. You don't want to get your cart stuck in the mud. So you have to raise the road surface up. That means laying down some kind of surface initially that will either absorb the groundwater or not allow the groundwater to displace the road.
The Royal Road was linked by 111 rest stations and inns every 18 miles, where travelers could eat, sleep, and switch to fresh horses. To ensure safety, watchmen were posted all along its great length.
Now, I'm going to talk with my friend, Dr. Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones from the University of Edinburgh, professor of ancient history. I got to ask you this. Was it that safe?
Essentially, yeah. I think what Darius, if you will, manages to do here is an incredible feat. I mean, we're standing here in Turkey, okay,
right,
and we could take one route straight the way through into central Iran. I mean, that's pretty good going.
How fast?
Okay, so if we're on horseback and we're riding from one of these little garrisons to garrison every 15 miles, changing fresh horses, we can do that in about 6-7 days, maybe.
6 or 7 days.
Yeah.
So you could send messages on this road, friends, next city?
Most definitely, and you know, and for trade, it's a godsend, as you can imagine. And this road cut through so much stuff. I mean, it just doesn't follow, you know, a formal pathway. It has to cross rivers, so it crosses the Tigris, it crosses
by
the
ferry,
River Halys,
right?
by ferry, right? Sometimes it clings to the side of mountains, sometimes it clings to the side of rivers. So the terrain is changeable. It's not drained or anything like that, so it's not as advanced as some of the Roman roads we get in later periods.
So it doesn't have a gutter system?
No, nothing like that, nothing like that. But what it's essentially is, it's sort of maybe 20 feet wide with a sort of chip-in base, which is good for horse treads and that kind of stuff, you know.
And carriages and
exactly, to get things through as quickly as you can, basically.
Well, Lloyd, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Yeah, thank you for enlightening us about this incredible road.
But Darius still wasn't through. There was one territory Darius had yet to firmly control: the vast riches of North Africa, and he was determined to build a gateway there. He had his engineers devise a giant canal linking the Mediterranean and the Red Sea.
Everyone has heard of the Suez Canal, but how many have heard of Darius's canal? What Darius did was build an east-west canal that was 130 miles long.
With the Persian knowledge of hydrology, Darius's engineers used digging tools made of bronze and iron to first open the canal, then clear any blown sand and line it with stone, ready for his ships to sail. It would take 7 years to complete the 130-mile-long waterway, with a massive labor force of Egyptian stone cutters and canal builders.
Parts of the canal between the Nile and the Red Sea were actually not waterways, but just points along which the ships could be dragged until they reached another deeper portion where they could again sail their course.
Darius says, I, Darius, king of kings, conqueror of Egypt, built this canal. He connected the Red Sea to the Nile River for trade, and he says, and ships were brought along my canal.